Hi everyone, my name's Luke and it's lovely to be back with you at Cheadle St Mary's, albeit virtually. I got a message from Ian a couple of weeks ago asking me if I would be willing to contribute to the latest Soundbite series as you guys go through early church history. Surprisingly, I did find this very, very interesting. I did an ancient history degree at university, and so when I saw the name Constantine on the list of names Ian wanted us to cover, I was very excited and I said, I want to do that one. Get me Constantine. So here we are. That's what this video is going to focus on. We're going to be looking at the Roman Emperor Constantine together. We're going on an adventure together today, but before we do, I thought it'd be fun to put myself to the test and see what I can remember about Constantine. Okay. Really wish I'd practiced this before I'd started videoing. Constantine is from the early 4th century AD, very early, so like the first couple of decades of the 300s. Really famous for winning a great battle at somewhere called Milvian Bridge, I think. And I think the story goes that he was marching on Rome in order to kind of take the city and become emperor, and the other army marched out of Rome, and Constantine had a smaller army, looked up in the sky, saw the shape of the cross, and he got his soldiers to paint it on their shields, because he said, the Lord, the Christian God will give me victory. And he goes and absolutely smashes the other army, becomes emperor of Rome, becomes a Christian. And although his faith was kind of up and down, I think, throughout the years, I think he got a bit confused with Jesus as the Son of God and the Sun God. I think I remember that correctly. Also, his mum used to like collecting Christian relics, and she ran around the world finding the cross of Christ and the Holy Grail and all these kind of things. And then he died. That's all I can remember. So there's £27,000 of a university degree or whatever it was. Great. Should I actually go away and actually prep something? I'll come back to you in a couple of days' time and we'll start this one again. See you in a minute. Okay, I've read my old ancient history notes, I've done my research. Hopefully I now know what I'm talking about. So I'm going to skip over some of the bits that I find boring and get to the exciting parts. I was going to ask if it's okay, but it has to be because you've not really got a choice. I'm just speaking to the camera. So we're going to skip over the boring parts. Constantine was born in somewhere called Illyria, which is around Albania, Croatia, and he was born around AD 280, which means I was right earlier on that he was kind of 4th century, early 300s. Get in. That'll do on background because we've got loads of things to cover. We've got battles, we've got councils, we've got visions, we've got so much more to get through. He was born in the 280s. Crack on. The next really significant date we get to is 311. So 311, this is my battle, this is the Milvian Bridge bit. 311, Constantine is heading for Rome to confront an enemy army that outnumbers his 4-1. Constantine on one side, Maxentius on the other. So Maxentius is the enemy, he's in Rome, he's in power, and he was confident that it couldn't be taken. Time and time again, history tells us things can be taken, and here's where we see a split. As Maxentius turns to pagan oracles for aid, who tell him that the enemy of the Romans would perish, Constantine ends up turning to Jesus. At this time, Constantine sees a vision in the sky, and the following is a quote from an old ancient history writer called Eusebius, who wrote almost exactly the same time as Constantine. A quote, "Accordingly, Constantine called on Jesus with earnest prayer to reveal who he was, and stretched forth his right hand to help him in his present difficulties. And while he was thus praying with fervent entreaty, like loads, a most extraordinary sign appeared to him from heaven, something which it might have been hard to believe had the story been told by any other person. But since the victorious emperor long afterwards declared it to the writer of this history, when he was honoured with his acquaintance in society, and confirmed his statement by an oath, who would hesitate to believe it, especially since other testimonies have established its truth? Constantine said that about noon, when the day was already beginning to decline, he saw with his own eyes the sign of a cross of light in the heavens, above the sun, and bearing the key inscription, "By this symbol you will conquer." He was struck with amazement at the sight, and his whole army witnessed the miracle. End quote. Thus, Constantine goes on to win a great God-given victory by the symbol of the cross. After centuries of persecution, of martyrdom, of suffering, a Christian has now risen to become the most powerful person in the world. As Eusebius goes on to record, the whole human race was freed from the oppression of the tyrants. We especially, who had fixed our hope upon the Christ of God, had gladness unspeakable. There's also an interesting point to be raised in the manner of which a Christian was raised to this position of great power. Here, a quote from Noah Chomsky, which highlights the shift in power that Christianity faced and some of the negative connotations and consequences that still face Christians and Christianity today. Quote, "Jesus himself and most of the message of the Gospels is a message of service to the poor, a critique of the rich and the powerful, and a pacifist doctrine. And it remained that way. That's what Christianity was, up until Constantine. Constantine shifted it so that the cross, which was the symbol of persecution of somebody working for the poor, was put on the shield of the Roman Empire. It became the symbol for violence and oppression, and that's pretty much what the church has been until present." You can agree with that and disagree with that, but that is a really interesting historical shift of Christians being at the bottom of society to suddenly being the cream of the crop. So that all happens in 311. Constantine becomes the emperor, the most powerful man in the world. Next date we're going to skip forward to is 323 AD, 12 years later. And Constantine triumphs over a guy called Licinius to become the sole ruler of the Roman world, because at this point it was split into east and west. This victory enables Constantine to move the seat of power really from Rome in the west and to Istanbul in the east. It was then known as Byzantium, but not for very long, because Constantine enlarged and enriched the city at enormous expense and built many magnificent churches throughout the east. This new capital was called New Rome, although it was soon dubbed Constantinople. He was a big church builder. St. Peter's in Rome, that was him. The Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, that was him. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem. The list goes on and on. And at this time, there was a heresy flying around, which historians have imaginatively titled the Arian heresy, because, well, it was a heresy by a guy called Arius. Essentially, it went like this. Jesus was not an eternal being, but was actually created at some point by the Father. Jesus, not an eternal being, but was created by the Father. So Constantine calls a great council of theologians, imaginatively titled the Council of Nicaea, because, well, it was a council at Nicaea. The council votes this heresy down and produced the Nicene Creed, which we're probably familiar with today, a statement of beliefs that brought the church together by reinforcing biblical doctrine. Christ is eternal and divine. It's important to note here that this council didn't invent this doctrine. It didn't suddenly make it up. It simply recognised and reiterated what the Bible has always said. Even now, today, there are those that still believe it was at this meeting in the Council of Nicaea 323 that Constantine essentially got bored, picked up loads of all of the kind of New Testament and Old Testament books and just went, great, the ones that stay on the table, we'll have them in the Bible. The ones that fall off, they can go. If you believe that, there is going to be a film and a book that will blow your mind. It's called The Da Vinci Code, and if you believe that, then you'll probably believe everything that says too. But for those of us who like evidence, sources, scriptures, and true history, let's crack on, shall we? This does bring us to the point of Constantine's faith, as well as his relationship with Christianity, which was at times tricky. Whilst it is clear from sources that his faith matured and deepened over time, pagan imagery and references to pagan gods was not uncommon on architecture and coinage. He had a particular fondness for the sun god, and there have always been rumours that Constantine's conversion to Christianity was an outward show, and in private he still worshipped the sun god. As I mentioned earlier, his public displays of faith to Jesus often did blur the lines between the sun god and the Son of God. I did remember that bit correctly. Constantine also ordered the executions of his eldest son, his second wife, and his favourite sister's husband, amongst others. While many of his actions can't be defended, he did wrong. He did bid farewell to the old pagan system of gods and make the cross an emblem of God's victory all over the world. Something strange that I didn't know but learned while researching this video: Constantine waited until death to be baptised as a Christian. His decision was not actually unusual in a day when many Christians believed one could not be forgiven after baptism. So what they did is they left it until they're about to die. So there'll be a really short period of time that they wouldn't sin, they'd be alright. Funnily enough, and typically Roman enough, Constantine the Christian became a god of his own upon his death in 337, which is just a typically ridiculous thing that the Romans like to do. Let's conclude. In conclusion, history is often not as neat as we would like it to be. We're used to thinking in definite terms, with key events singled around individuals, because otherwise things get complicated and greyer. So the idea of Constantine single-handedly reshaping the Western world through the sheer force of his faith is a bit too neat to be true. But what we can say is that our sovereign God, the God who has been in charge of history and always will be, he is over and above all things, and he did bring about a cultural and religious shift that literally changed the shape of the world, brought the gospel to millions of people across the Roman Empire, and allowed Christians to flourish in freedom. Who knows where we would be without the power Constantine was able to wield? Who knows what the world would look like? Who knows how the spread of the gospel would have changed? Not me. All I know is that I am very, very grateful that the Lord our God is powerful enough, generous enough, loving enough, and committed enough to see his kingdom grow. Because without Constantine taking Christians from the bottom of society to the cream of the crop, how do we know that the gospel would have spread all this way across the Roman Empire to this little corner of the world? We believe and trust it would have done because we have a great God, but the world would certainly have looked very, very different indeed.